Hello, for folks in the room with us, we will begin right at 2:30. So we're super excited that you're here, and we're just getting ready right before 2:30. So thank you for your patience. Hello, everyone. So we're gonna get started here soon. If all the participants and host, co-host would be able to turn on your cameras. Can you all hear me all right? Awesome. Okay. Um, Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started because I know that we have an hour with our two wonderful co-hosts and so our guest host, and we want to maximize our time with them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, I just want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for attending and being present today and willingness to be here on a Friday with us to have a really important conversation. And we also want to say that like this is a kickoff event for our Heritage Month. And this year it's really exciting because we kind of revamped it and we're super excited. And it is APIDA Heritage Month, which is Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American Heritage Month, which is a mouthful, but it's really important that we acknowledge that. And that is what is going to revolve around our conversation today. And our topic for today is APIDA Futures. But before we begin, we are going to do a land acknowledgement and our vision statement, which is what we usually do before we have a podcast or an episode released. So we're going to continue that on.
Right, so let it be acknowledged that Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Ampunefu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations of Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. We have Souksavanh also in Arizona currently, and so Arizona is on the traditional homelands of the Okemil Otham and the Salt River Maricopa Prima Native communities.
All right. Here at Making Waves, we try and illuminate the experiences of Asian and Pacific Islanders at Oregon State University. Facilitating dialogue surrounding culture and diversity, we hope to dive into some of the complexities of the Asian and Pacific Islander experience through topics such as pop culture, social identity, multiculturalism, etc. Among many of the topics we wish to cover, we hope that you can resonate with our stories as well as expose yourself to some new ideas and perspectives.
Thank you so much, Jonathan and Bekah. So as I mentioned before, our topic for today is envisioning APIDA futures, and we're super, super excited about this topic. But before we begin, we're going to do intros, but I also want to let participants know that there is a Q&A feature. And if you have any questions throughout anything or anything resonated with you, please go ahead and use that feature to ask any questions or have any comments for our wonderful guest hosts that are here. So before we begin, we're going to do a little introductions of who we are and what we do at APCC or even the work that we do. So I'll let Angela go ahead and start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela, she, her, hers, and I am the media designer here at the APCC.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan, and I am a student success peer facilitator here at the APCC. I also wanted to include that if you are watching us on the YouTube as well, we are watching the comment section. So if you guys would like to submit questions through that as well, we're able to see it live and answer them as well.
Hello, my name is Bekah. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a student success peer facilitator at the APCC.
Hello everyone. Yaat Aisha Souksavanh Kia Vorbuth Yinashia Kia Ani Nishle Nuts Uzubashichi Ashi Hetashiche Nuts Uzidashanella. My name is Souksavanh Kia Vorbuth. I use they them pronouns. I am the graduate assistant for APCC, and I'm also an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, Dene Nation in the Four Corners, and second generation Laotian, which is really important to this conversation that we're having today. But before we start asking questions, I want to give space for our two wonderful guest hosts here today who I know and really admire both of them, their work, their scholar activism work, their personalities. They're just overall amazing human beings. And so I'm really honored that they're here sharing this time and space with us today. So if we could have, we'll do Robin first and then Sharda. If we could introduce yourself, please introduce yourself and your scholar / activism work that you do.
Malo e te lava hokohingoa Robin Fifita. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you so much, Souksavanh, for this invitation and for welcoming me to this space, and also Sarah and all the student staff at APCC and with this program. I'm really excited to be a part of this. So just a brief introduction of myself and kind of the work that I do here at Oregon State and the scholarship that I'm involved in as well. I'm currently a full-time student success coach with Oregon State eCampus. And I work individually one-on-one with students who are online learners to help build out goals and meet their own understanding of success while they're with Oregon State. And I also contribute and support the Tribal Communities Initiative with Oregon State. And that's specific to eCampus as well. So we work with tribal communities in the Americas, also Indigenous communities in the Pacific Islands. I would say part of what is an important part of my activism work, it'd probably be the work that I do as an artist and as a poet. And I'm also dedicate a lot of my time towards reproductive justice as a doula. So I specialize in visual art, specifically murals, and have had the privilege to be involved in a series of community-based murals in Hawaii, working with Native Hawaiian artists and Pacific Islanders there, and have looked to continue that type of momentum and activism here in Oregon as one of the advisors for the Pacific Islander Club, and also serving on the advisory councils for the APCC and also the Native American Longhouse Inahas. So that's some of the work I do at OSU and within the communities there. And I'm also a certified traditional health worker within the state of Oregon. So I'm able to serve different families as a birth support person, and currently really work specifically with Indigenous and Pacific Islander families and their birth experience. Yeah, so that's what I do. I'm also a student, so I work full time, but that's one of the reasons that I'm close with Souksavanh and Shar as well, is my major area in interdisciplinary graduate program is within women, gender, and sexuality studies. So I'm focusing on creative expression and also representation for Pacific Islander student experience at Oregon State, and how art and creative expression can be a decolonial tool for empowerment and really challenging some of the existing forms of representation we currently see on campus. So that's me. So happy to be here again. Thank you for this time. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Robin. Sharda?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sharda. You can also call me Shar. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thanks to Souksavanh and Sarah and APCC for having me and for inviting me, and I'm very excited to be here. So I am a third year PhD student in WGSS, and I'm also doing the queer studies minor. I also work as the media outreach coordinator for the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. In my research, my area of interest is in feminist cultural studies. And so thinking about, so my work is like rooted in Desi feminisms and South Asian feminisms, in Tamil feminisms. And I'm interested in, thinking about different ways of looking at cultural productions, different ways of looking at like art, film, texts, and other sort of cultural artifacts for anti-colonial meaning making, and thinking about like the broader project of restoring and sort of reclaiming self-respect for marginalized communities, particularly colonized communities. And so I'm really excited about today's conversation because we'll be talking a lot about APIDA Futurity and different ways of imagining that and how to decenter white supremacy. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I am super, super excited that you all are here. And I'm sure most of the participants in the room are also super excited that you're here. And I'm just really excited. So before we begin, and this can go to anyone in the chat, what does APIDA mean to you? And for folks in the room, I explained it, but if you came in late, APIDA is Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American. And anyone can chime in when they want. I can start us off. So for me, I think, and this was someone working on like the planning committee for Heritage Month, I think it's really important. One, some of like if you're a regular listener of this podcast, you kind of know a little bit about each of us, me, Jonathan, Bekah, and Angela. But I grew up with only a single parent, who was my mom, who is full Dene. And so she doesn't know much about my Laotian side. And so she actually learned how to make Laotian food. And then that's what she raised us off. So we had that cultural connection was just through food, because she didn't know anything else. But I think that was like the power of her love to do that for us, which is magical. And so I think over time, since I was always in my like Dene identity culture, I didn't really explore my Laotian identity besides the food, as I mentioned. And so coming to OSU, I was like, this is my opportunity to do that. I'm not from Oregon. So it was a new experience, a new time where I was able to like use my full name without any like shame, and folks embraced it, and it was magical. And so like my name is Laotian as well. And so like coming to APCC and working as a graduate assistant, I was really nervous, right? Like I didn't feel like I connected with my Asian identity because I only had food. But then realizing now, being in this role and in this position, supporting students, being there to support myself actually in a lot of ways has been magical. And I think APIDA encompasses the diverse array of identities within Asian diaspora, Asian Pacific Islander Desi diaspora, right? And like the conditions that I live in isn't a fault of mine, right? And so I think APIDA allows me to live in that space, allow me to live in my truth of my upbringing. Like I can't change it. The only thing I can do is be embraced within a community that accepts what I was put into, right? And so I think that's what APIDA means to me. And I think that's the beautiful part of it.
I think kind of following after what Souksavanh said, it really shows and encompasses like the how united we really are, having, you know, all these different identities, and regardless of how much similar our experiences are, how much things that we go through. And, you know, after like, if you have been listening to our podcast, like despite our different discussions, and, you know, each of us have those different experiences, but yet we still experience the same exact things, go through this society together. And again, really shows that just what APIDA just stands for, just really shows, you know, that solidarity that we have in between us. So yeah, I think it just shows like the similarity of our experiences and how we're all in this together. So
Yeah, kind of to piggyback off that a little further, for me, it also means like opportunity of education. Similar to Souksavanh's experience, like I identify as Asian American, but I'm a Chinese adoptee. For regular listeners, they know that. But it's something that I never grew up with a strong connection to an Asian American identity. So this podcast, and especially this month, has allowed me a lot of opportunities to not only learn more about like the community, but learn more about individual experiences and perspectives that shape that community. And then you'll learn a lot through that about yourself and how you fit in and kind of impact the community.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Especially, I think like being mixed and coming from like a very big family, being in touch like with my Asian roots was very important. And I think over these episodes, having different guests come on the show and talk about their own like Asian experiences have definitely been like really enlightening, and just like learning so much about everyone's different struggles, but yet they're all like still very similar in a way. So I think it's very important to like realize how they all kind of do tie in together still.
Yeah, I relate to everything all of you are saying. And APIDA, I think it really opens up like so many possibilities, right? To think about coalition, to think about solidarity, and to think about sort of recognizing systems of oppression, that really sort of are distinct based on our own lived experience, and at the same time how they're also like overlapping, and how like ways to find our commonalities, ways to find what we have in common, and working for a better future. And I'm thinking about also especially since the last 2 years, with so much happening around us, and the ways in which like for a lot of us, I think virtual spaces like this has really opened up ways to connect, right? Whether we're talking about the international student ban that happened last year, whether we're talking about the anti-Asian hate, which has always been there, but was even more pronounced in the last 1 year. And then the ways in which, there is increasing conversations also about like introspection within all our communities, right? Of sort of, questioning anti-Blackness, questioning colorism, and all those conversations, right? And so I think that, this virtual, community building is so important. And I think that right now, as we speak, we're also engaging in that in a lot of ways as praxis, finding commonalities, finding solidarities, and recognizing, ways to connect and, imagine those radical futures. Yeah.
I love this question. And so what does APIDA mean to me as a Tongan, as a Pacific Islander? APIDA means change and progress and transformation. I think new possibilities and spaces that have, I think, at times been stagnant and highly problematic. As a Pacific Islander within an API or an AAPI umbrella, there can be some misrepresentation and invisibility that takes place in those designations. And for myself or for others, anytime there's aggregate data or groupings, there's always the potential for erasure. And so I love that this is new. I love that it's different. I hope people ask questions. I hope people are like, what's APIDA? What does that mean? Just to get the conversation going and say, like, why is it different? Why is it different this year? And why has it always been something else? And why is it different now? I love that there's space to be flexible and to be fluid. I think that's really where we have space for possibility and for change and for conversations like this. And so I'm really grateful to be a part of this conversation, because I think API and AAPI spaces haven't always been the safest or most welcoming for me as a Pacific Islander. And so I feel great that I get to be in this space with everyone. And these are designations that were placed upon us. It's not like we all came together and made it up at one time. These are like federal designations that happened not that long. It's like 60s and 70s when census stuff was created, and then we all had to follow suit, and programming followed, and we report to the federal government because of these designations. And it's really tricky because our funding depends on it. So how we allocate resources depend on it. And why not change it? Why not question how this is working for people? Is this the best way to really understand and highlight everyone's stories? So I'm excited about this name. There's so much power in naming. There's so much power, I think, in questioning and challenging what's been in existence before, and just getting people to think like, yeah, why is it that way? Or how did it exist? And as a staff member and a student at Oregon State University, as a Pacific Islander, I find myself and the students that I work with and advise, we move between different spaces on campus too, whether it's the APCC or whether it's within the Longhouse, identifying with different Indigenous communities too. And so I'm excited about this name, and I'm excited about how we get to just decide what works for us, and what hasn't worked for us in the past. And just having this conversation, I think, is very powerful, especially during and after a time and a year of so much challenge, I think, in particular for all of our communities. We've endured like loss and pain and heartache. And it's not that things were like great before, but they've become really difficult within this past year. And for us to be together in this space, and like everyone has said, to talk about solidarity and alliance building, I think is a very powerful statement. We have a lot of different forces coming down on us in different oppressive ways, and not always coming at us in the same ways. And the fact that we get to be together in the same virtual room and share this space, I think is really representative of the power of the possibilities we have together.
Thank you all so much. That was so powerful. I think just reflecting on what everyone's talking about, right? We're at a time where like we are reclaiming our renaming for ourselves, like, right? The names that we understand today are literally made by Western folks. And what I mean by that is like literally, for example, Native people, like American Indian, that is not what we identified as. And it's a term that has been put on us, which has also been done to our APIDA community. And so I'm really happy that we're naming that in this space because we're able to reclaim it for ourselves, right? Like I am Laotian, Sharla is Tamil, Robin is Tongan, right? We're that's the power of what I think APIDA is doing for us is like, yes, it's still broad, but I think it's inclusive as well because there's so much diversity within that. So thank you all so much for like all of that because I think I'm super excited to see where this conversation goes. So our next questions, and I also want to just remind folks that you can, if anything resonated with you or if anything stuck out or you have more questions about anything at all, go ahead and put it in the Q&A section. And we have folks in the room who are monitoring it so we can go ahead and answer those. And we decided to do a live session to have that interaction with the audience as well. So we highly encourage that you use that Q&A box. Don't be afraid to ask any question. We're here to be there to support and provide any resource as possible. So our next question, what does an or your Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American future look like? Which is a very loaded question. And I think very powerful too. And what we mean by futures is just like our envisionment of like what we can become and what we can be and what we can bring into the world. And that's what we mean by like future, which is very powerful for us at this state in time right now. I can go ahead and go first again. I don't mind. I really like talking anyway. But so like my envisionment of APIDA Future and a lot of my work actually is envisioning futures for BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color in general. Like that, it's really tied into my work. And so I really love this question because it allows me to explore like, what does it mean for me as a second generation Laotian in America, right? And analyzing that, one, acknowledging that like I am multiracial and I can't exist in a space and I wrote this in a piece too about Indigenous futures. Same with APIDA futures. I can't exist as like one thing. I can't exist in APIDA future as just Laotian, right? It just can't happen because I'm not. I have to be in APIDA future or Indigenous future as like Dene and Laotian, or in the APIDA future as Laotian and Dene, because you can't separate it. And that's just who I am and how like literally it will take away from who I am essentially. So you can't have that as a multiracial person. You have to include all of you, right? And that includes everything as well, like my queer identity, that is in the future as well, right? And so for me, I think it looks like a space where Asian folks can live without fear of being attacked, literally attacked, where APIDA people don't have to worry about the color of their skin navigating spaces, right? Like that is a huge thing. I think marked as foreigner, as the belonging or not belonging, that is a really big issue as well, of like when people see us in spaces, everyone in this room that's in this panel, we're already marked as like we don't belong, and that is just a fact, and it's unfortunate. And so in APIDA Future, I envision us as like we do belong, right? We do belong here. This is our space. This is our time, and our voices, right? And it's important. And so I just envision like there's so much more that I could go on with, but those are just some snippets and examples of like what my APIDA Future kind of looks like. And I would love to hear like what you all have to say as well, because I know it's going to be amazing.
I can go. So I think to me, I think it sort of is about, I think Souksavanh talked about this, right? Like when you talked about space and time, it really makes me think about how like a big part of APIDA Futures for me is to challenge these Eurocentric notions of like space, time, home, and things like that, right? Because as folks of color, we, I think, already inhabit so many homes. I was recently rereading a novel. I was actually, in fact, teaching this in my class. It's called We Need New Names, and it's a novel by Violet Bulawayo. And so basically so she's this diasporic a writer, and she lives in Budapest. She lives in her home place in Zimbabwe. She lives in the US. She moves to the US. And so she's like transnational, like she's traveling transnationally constantly, right? And so, so she talks something about home, right? So what is home for a diasporic person? So we are already inhabiting multiple homes. For some of us, food is home. For some of us, language is home, right? And then like even thinking about what diaspora means in so many ways is that like already like belonging, the idea of belonging is so different for a lot of us. So for me, I think that an APIDA Future is normalizing this notion of how you know, as communities of color, and with our own all unique experiences, unique lived experiences, unique histories and presence, right? Of, you know, settler colonialism, of, you know, imperialism, and everything that's shaped our presence and shaping our presence in so many ways. And how, like, you know, challenging these ideas of modernity, of development, of progress, of linear time, you know, past to present, and how like that doesn't really help us because our experiences exceed all of those things. And I think that is centering and normalizing that is a big part of futurity. And I think that work is already being done by so many of our artists, you know, imagining those things, you know, that work is already being done by our mothers, right? By, like Souksavanh mentioned, like cooking, like, you know, how many worlds can you bring into your kitchen, right? And so we're already doing that, we're already living that. And I think that imagining our futures is such a central part of our alliance work, and, you know, decentering you know, Euro-Western, you know, white systems, which is basically, you know, othering us constantly, you know, in so many ways. Yeah.
I find this question quite interesting, I honestly say. And I think it's because, like, after listening to you two, most especially, it kind of hits a little bit home for me because for me personally, Filipino American, but born and raised in Hawaii, I think this is kind of a glimpse of what that APIDA Future is already, because being born and raised there, we've already had a, you know, growing up with a group of different identities. And I can say, like, you know, all of them being APIDA, definitely Asian American, Pacific Islander and Desi. And to grow up within that community and space where I think is already envisioning of like how that APIDA Future can be. Now, granted, it's not perfect at the moment, of course, but already seeing how we communicate with each other, like how Charlotte mentioned of like that diaspora, we're all finding this one place and calling it home now. And yet we find that community with each other. We're already finding our similarities but differences and making this whole new culture where it pushes away that, you know, that white supremacy and calling it what our own is. And so I think we're already at a great start. And of making that new space that Robin talked about, of like where we can be and how we can continue to grow together and make it our own. So yeah.
I think to go off of that, Jonathan made a great point. And I think for like, especially in the future, having just to like normalize people's feelings of like feeling like isolated, like that's generally normal, especially nowadays, to feel like as an Asian in this time period through like the pandemic, you kind of feel like a little bit more like isolated and a lot of negativity towards you. And so like moving forward in the future, like remembering like the past, but also like making room for like changes in the future. And like Jonathan was saying that like we are making like environments that are making strides to have that better future. And I think that's great acknowledgement right there.
I'll go ahead and share. I love this question. I also love exploring futurities and what our imaginings can be for our future. And similar to what Souksavanh had shared, I also have mixed ethnic backgrounds. And so my ancestry comes from very different places in the world. My father's from a village of Koloa in Vava'u in the Kingdom of Tonga, and my mother's ancestry is German and Irish, and she was born and raised in Idaho. So very different experiences and understandings of the world and moving through the world. And I'm the product of that intersection, you know, and a lot of the art that I'm drawn to and that inspiration that comes when I do create art is really exploring a lot of those intersecting identities and how they're layered and complex. And I also feel the same, like I cannot move through this world or exist in this world without recognizing those complexities. And I'm thankful that I have that. I'm thankful that I have a different type of understanding of what it means to be who I am and to look the way I do. And I was born and raised in the States. And so even just being a Tongan American and what that means and living in a diasporic community and being away from the islands too, there's lots of different ways that I think islanders are feeling misplaced or displaced in ways, and now reclaiming this diasporic movement and reclaiming this as ways of being for that we've always been traveling and navigating and moving through spaces and remaining just as Tongan as we've always been. And so I think there's a lot of power in reclaiming that too. I love this emphasis on naming and making known. So I think a future for me would look like really living in our wholeness and not having to question how to show up in specific spaces to help other people feel more comfortable with who we are and have a better understanding of who we are. I think we have so many different backgrounds within APIDA. I mean, it's complex, it's layered, it's like these vast regions and geographical spaces across the globe. And we're like trying to clump ourselves all together and make and understand who we are. I think a future for me is to be able to have everyone feel just as important as anyone else and not have to feel that we have to make people have a deeper understanding and go through different ways of helping people make sense of like, oh, where are you from? I'm from here. It's kind of like this and it's kind of like that. Like even as a Tongan, it's like, it's kind of like Hawaiian, but we're further in the Pacific, and we have to like break down layers to help people understand our own identities and what that can do to us over time, to have to question all the time to make sense of who we are to others can be really exhausting. So a future would be like just showing up as we are, feeling whole in our differences, really being able to celebrate those and acknowledge those, I think specifically as a Pacific Islander, a future would be to feel safe in spaces and not have to question if I'm too brown or too big or too loud or too much for whoever I'm around, and know that they'll accept me for who I am and not just really tokenizing or celebrating particular parts of my identities and just letting me be who I am. I think for an APIDA future, I would love to also see less violence. I would love to see less oppression. I would love to see a deeper understanding and acknowledgement of our histories, and especially like talking, I think, specific to the US and experiences that we have here, is really agreeing with Souksavanh in the sense of belonging. I think we all come from communities that have home in many different locations and in so many different communities located all across the world, and to feel that we belong in whatever space that we show up in. And I think our future would include continuing these types of dialogues, like having conversations with people that we might not know a lot about or feel that we know a lot about. And I think there's so much power in just sharing and feeling open. And I agree with Shar too, is continuing like through artistic expression and challenging that. It's one of the reasons I work towards and really help to facilitate community-based art and collaborative expression, because I love to see the types of work that can be created with groups as opposed to an individual, because I really truly believe that those intersections and those connections that take place in that particular time is so unique than to any other event that could take place. And like the power of what could be created with multiple individuals is something that no one could do on their own. I think we all come from communities that really reveres that type of work and community-based work and collaborative work, and that how powerful that can be. And when we give space to many as opposed to kind of just one. So a future would be continuing collaboration and seeing what could come out of interactions that we couldn't do on our own.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm like completely blown away and speechless after hearing like everyone's ideals and futures. Like thinking about this question was really hard for me because I was like, oh, I don't even know how I feel like now. And so after hearing everyone's thoughts and expressions, like I think the ideal future would, be embracing your complexities and intersections and exploring those with others in a safe community and space, but also creating spaces to be vulnerable and like okay with those complexities. I think a lot of times too, it's brushed under the rug. A lot of our insecurities and confusion and guilt and jealousy towards like others or ourselves about our identities are often not talked about, or we keep it isolated, and then that creates a bigger rift, I guess, in who you want to identify as or where you feel comfortable. And as Sharda was saying, like what you want to define as your home versus how others define your home as. So yeah, finding empowerment in who you are, but also in empowerment in being confused, because I think that's just life in general is confusion. And so accepting that, embracing that, and allowing others to do so as well would be ideal, I guess.
Thank you all so much for that. Sorry, I just took a drink and then I swallowed. So to like kind of transition us, I just want to say like thank you all so much for those beautiful answers. And I just want to remind folks in the room, and if you're watching on YouTube, this is also on YouTube, and if you're on YouTube, you know you're on YouTube, that you can add a question into the comments or the chat box or the Q&A, and we have folks in the room who are screening those to like, so we can present those as well to our panelist or guest host for this event. And we're super excited about it and super looking forward to your questions that you have. And so go ahead, if you have a question, go ahead and drop that into the Q&A box or the comment box, because we have some folks looking over that. Angela, was there anyone?
Yeah, I was just gonna say like, yeah.
Okay.
Not just like questions, but like also if you just have any fun comments that you want to say or just like anything, go ahead and say it because like we're all reading it. Yeah, just like saying people are saying like hi, and like all these soon to be doctors because you guys are studying so hard for your degrees. But yeah, don't feel shy. Just put your comments. We're trying to make it like more interactive for sure. So like if you don't have a question, just like anything fun that you want to add, that counts too.
So we got a question. Awesome.
Awesome.
So this is, I can go ahead and ask it to the audience. To the panelists. There's being in solidarity that there's labeling or being labeled or categorized. So how do they align or don't align with each other?
And for the panelists, I think you can actually see it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was going to copy and paste it into the chat. Doing the most.
Sorry, can you read the question again?
Yeah. So it's there's being in solidarity and there's labeling or being labeled or categorized. So how do they align or don't align with each other?
Good question.
Yeah, I can. Angela, were you gonna?
Oh no, go ahead.
Jump in. Okay. So I was thinking. I hope I'm understanding it correctly. I think that the way we understand like labeling / naming / categorization of things is through like Westernization. It really wants to like know everything about you to essentially go back, circle around to like what we talked about before about belonging and not belonging, right? And this is very centered, and I'm talking from like a US perspective, because I think this is where most of it happens, and where a lot of harm comes from it, is that like the labeling aspect or being labeled is a way to literally like distinguish where you fit and literally where you fit as on power too, essentially, which is unfortunate. And so I think there's ways to label folks who are not from America as not belonging, right? And to then like to then hold power or oppress or allow folks to be violent toward us in a lot of ways. And so, and then I also see the align part as like, right, we all, which we're having this conversation about, is like the labeling allows us to be in a space, which I mean, I don't agree with the labeling, and I'll say that for my stance, because I think labeling and naming from an outside perspective is a way of power. It literally is a way of power to hold over folks. And I will use the example of like Native American again, right? Indian is a way of holding power over Native folks in the United States. It just is, in a lot of ways. And so I think that's where the harm gets done. And this space that we're in right now allows us to step outside of that space, because that's not where we belong anymore. And we're allowed to say, I am Dene and Laotian, or I am Tamil, or I am Tongan, right? And so we're able to use that as a power of labeling or naming ourselves, right? To then be in community with each other to talk about the oppressive behaviors that I maybe we can even distinguish it of like Western labeling / white supremacist labeling compared to like reclaiming labeling or naming, because there is a significant difference with it, of like how we begin to understand the world. And I think there's a lot of power with us naming or reclaiming who we are again, in it to be who we are.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is kind of like always trying to put everything into a box. And like you said, like in America, I feel like there's always like a spectrum or like a scale, which is like, this is good, this is bad, this is normal, this is not normal. And I think when they try to do that, I think it limits a lot of possibilities for people being like, oh, what do I identify with if this is like what is said to be like okay and this is like not. So I think that's like one thing that like I definitely got from like what Souksavanh was saying. I was like, yeah, you're right, everything is kind of in a box labeled and like trying to be fit perfectly so that everyone tries to be similar with each other, and I think that's like not really right.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it makes me think about the politics of labeling and even with the term Desi, I think that Desi is like, it's the name for the South Asian diaspora, right? Like, so folks from all over the subcontinent, and it's like really a term of solidarity, which sort of brings folks from different parts of the South Asian subcontinent, and more specifically the Indian subcontinent, to like, find like a common ground and to create this sort of home away from home, with all the stuff they have in common, and like as an identity, it's like so useful in so many spaces, right? And then at the same time, there's a tension around the term as well, where so what is happening more recently is like the reclamation of Desi, right? And so to say that like we're going to use the term Desi as like a reclamation or as a healing or as something that like denotes love and solidarity and bridging difference, and sort of and because what are these borders anyway, right? So even similar to what Souksavanh said, right, like within the subcontinent, like different borders between like the different countries were all colonially imposed borders. So even like where I'm from, India, like India did not exist before colonization. It's like a colonial term. It's like a so thinking about that and thinking about how the existence of a Desi diaspora itself is resistance. It's pushing back against these borders and saying we are going to be in solidarity with each other, and sort of that also does the work of like pushing back against dominant sort of borders, and sort of separations between different peoples. And so I think, this question sort of makes me think about like all those processes that and all those tensions between the usefulness of identity and how communities of color like are like actively reclaiming all these terms, and also like an understanding of all these histories behind it also is sort of part of that, I think.
Thank you all. We're gonna add another question into it. We were just asked another question, and you can answer either one too. They wrote, you guys are amazing, which is super sweet. In that future, what are some ways that you could imagine community spaces that would encourage APIDA representation in ways that you don't see today, that we don't see today, like ways to encourage recognition that APIDA identities are a part of the communities rather than an othered identity?
I think that's a great question. Like the first thing that came to my mind was kind of like what we're doing now. Like we're having these talks, and we're like, you know, all together trying to spread awareness and talking about like issues that a lot of people might not be comfortable talking about normally. So I think definitely creating these types of spaces, whether that's like over the internet or like on campus classes or different events that are going to be held. I think this type of vibe and environment of just like feeling safe to talk, because I think a lot of times when we do create big environments, people don't necessarily feel safe or like included. So I think definitely trying to make these certain events with people to share their own experiences definitely makes it more welcoming.
I can take a turn because I want to say what's up to Reagan anyways. So I'll answer Reagan's question first. So talking a little bit about solidarity labeling or being labeled, I think this is really important because I think maybe there's some misconceptions about solidarity at times where it's like sameness, where there's power in solidarity with difference and really recognizing difference, and how naming difference can be really different than labeling as well. Labeling tends to be like what's imposed upon us, similar to what Souksavanh was referring to, is like, and these labels really have come from like, there's such a strong influence from like the census or like nonprofit movements that are coming that mimic what the census categories for race and ethnicity here in our country. And there's a lot of people working on how to disaggregate that and how to build new categories for folks. So yeah, categorization can be very problematic. And then kind of that reclamation of naming can be really empowering. And I think what we're witnessing today is an example of that, and how there's ways we can work within our communities to say what works best for us or what works better for us and what we have access to at this point. And things can continue to change. And so I think that alignment, it really is a difference of like when it's placed upon us and when it comes from within us, right? When we're kind of having to fit into a category that some other, you know, power has said, this is what makes sense for everyone else, so let's just get in line and keep moving. And then when we actually get to think more critically and challenge that category ourselves to say, is this actually what works for me in the communities I'm with? I think what's tricky too with API and AAPI, what's been in existence this entire time, is that a lot of that responsibility falls upon all of us to fix something that we didn't create in the first place, right? It's like, okay, how do we make it work for all of us? And there's times where even intentions of just being inclusive might not be the best representation of an issue. I think that, you know, there's some different movements about like stop AAPI hate and violence, especially during COVID, where the way that violence is showing up within Asian and Asian American communities might look very different than how it's showing up in Pacific Islander communities. But there's a hesitancy and kind of a tension of not being inclusive in those spaces because we don't want to be like, this is who we work with. How can we say we're going to do this on our own and you do this on your own? So that can be hard to start to kind of separate those designations and making sure that communities are still feeling supported in the ways that they need to. So it can be tricky, but I think it's a great question. I think it's good that we really talk about the difference of labeling from others and naming that comes from within ourselves and our own communities. The other question, let me see if okay. Ways to encourage recognition of APIDA identities or part of communities rather than other identity. I would come back to even just this event too, where we are really, I think the difference of voices that's happening even within this program is really new and unique from maybe what's existed before. And I think that this is a really great example of how we're showing kind of unique parts of our communities. And I'm not exactly sure how to make it where we're kind of just within the broader communities, if that's, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly, rather than othered. I think one thing that's difficult about the US is that there are many other places where people are othered, like we just know differences and we understand them through language or through our ethnic identities or ancestral backgrounds, and that other isn't necessarily bad. But I think what happens in the US is that anything other than typically like a white dominant space could be considered bad, if that makes sense. Like the other is not necessarily a good thing, where in some spaces other is just something different and it doesn't have a different value to it, if that makes sense. But as like BIPOC folks, we tend to exist in a space of other that gets a really derogatory association with it as well. So that's tricky because we have a complex history within this country of how that works. So I don't have all the answers to that question, but I think it's really good just to question that, like, how do we exist in our differences and explore this otherness in a way that can be a good thing, because we don't also want to just be all the same. We want to recognize those differences, and how do we get to a point where it's a positive place to be? So I guess I'm answering your question with more questions, but I think it's a really good one. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for that and for the questions as well. So before we kind of get going, because I know we're at time, I do kind of want to like end off on like a really positive and enlightening note. So I have one more question and we'll go around and then we'll kind of just close out with just like announcements of what's going on. I know that we're going a little over, but I hope that's okay with you all. But the last final question to like leave everyone off on is, what are some recommendations / suggestions to get us to APIDA Futures? Or even just any closing comments that you would like to have as well.
I can talk about this, and I think honestly, just as how we shared earlier, like, you know, really like spaces like this and creating more spaces like this to just have all of us here together and talk about and discuss and, you know, hash out all these questions that we have and make it aware within each other of, like, you know, making it more comfortable within us. And I think another big thing too that was brought up, that I think Robin brought up too, was that, you know, making these spaces comfortable for one another. You know, we being in a place where we don't have to worry about like the way we talk or the way we dress, and we can just comfortably like just come in here and recognize each other and be happily with those spaces without any of those precognitions, is what I really think that future is going to be like. Um and really looking forward to that, definitely.
Yeah, to kind of bounce off that, I think too, in creating a safe space is, I guess, being vulnerable and asking questions. I think a lot of times when people don't understand terms or understand, I guess, the labels we have, or even like about a different community, we shut down because we don't want to be offensive or we don't want to look stupid. And especially if we are supposed to be considered part of those communities in that giant umbrella term, then we're like, oh man, I can't identify with this community because I don't know everything about everything. So yeah, creating spaces like this to have just a conversation in general, but then also to be open-minded in learning about other communities on those deeper complex levels, and then being open enough to be answering those questions in like respectful ways on both ends.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jonathan and Rebecca on that. I think for the future, that environment is definitely important. And I also just kind of want to say to the comments, especially on the YouTube live, you guys are so encouraging. They're all like, we're proud of you. And and yeah, and like saying that like, thanks for putting on the event. And I think it was fun for all of us to put on this event. So I'm glad that you guys all were so encouraging and the comments were also positive. Thank you so much. I hope you guys all have like a great day. But yeah, is there anything else, Souksavanh?
Yeah, thank you for those comments on YouTube, y'all. That's super nice and amazing, and we like feel good about it. Thank you. I know I do. But I do want to go back to Shar and Robin on your closing notes, and then we'll wrap up. And I know that, as I mentioned, we are over, and I know some folks have to get places and stuff. Hopefully not traveling too much. And you can come back to the episode if you need. It will be on. It's on YouTube Live right now, but it'll be saved as a video on YouTube as well. So you can come back to it, or if you want to stay with us and hang out with us for a little bit longer, that's cool too. But I just want to give more space and time for Sharda and Robin to answer that last question before we kind of wrap up.
I'll just share in closing. Again, just really happy to be a part of this conversation with you all. I'm so impressed, even just with the student staff that are here, and just your ability to facilitate this space, for you to show up the way that you do, for all of your thoughts and comments. And this makes me even more excited about our futures, that like, if we can do this now, and if y'all are like, this is the level you're at this point in your life, I think our futures are looking bright. So this has been a great experience for me, very humbling. And I love the mentions of just this vulnerability and a question asking. We all come from really complex histories as well. And so to have to understand and know where we come from, and then also feel like we need to be the experts on all of the communities that we're kind of grouped with, it is an overwhelming burden, right? And we want to feel that like we're being respectful and open and understanding. And I love that we can admit that we don't know it all, right? We're all doing our best. And so this is a wonderful time to ask questions and to share a little bit more about ourselves that we may not share in other places. And again, just really happy to be here. I hope that these types of conversations continue. I love APIDA Month. I love that we're moving and shaking and changing during this time. It's super exciting. I think it just is that step into a new space, and some really exciting possibilities for all of us in our communities.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say, but thank you for having us, and especially as part of this kickoff for APIDA Month. It's very exciting. I'll just leave you all with a quote. I brought a quote from Adrienne Maree Brown's Pleasure Activism, and I'll just leave you with that. So I'll read it out. We have to practice creating new relationships. The possibilities of our living shift directly in relationship to the rigor of our loving. Love the people, love ourselves, love each other, love the possible into being.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Shar. I love that quote too. And thank you so much, like everyone, for being here. Before we kind of like wrap up, I do have some last minute announcements. And I just want to echo what everyone else has said about like recommendations for APIDA Futures. I think it's really important and crucial at this time. Like the pandemic has like impacted us all in different ways. And I think a lot so more within the APIDA community. And so I highly encourage you to advocate and be there for the Stop Asian Hate movement, and be there for the second wave that is going on in India right now. If you do not know, there is a second wave going on in India, and they're getting hit really hard. So I'll be there for folks who are Desi as well during this time, because it is hitting folks hard, even in America as well. So be there for friends, community, family as well during this time. Before we head off, though, I do have as I mentioned, a couple announcements. So Making Waves is a regular podcast that we do, co-hosted by Jonathan, Bekah, Angela, and I, that comes out every Friday. And we have some really exciting episodes this month. This was our only live episode. All of them are already done and recorded, so they'll be put out on Fridays. So we're super excited. The topics kind of go with our themes for each week, and I forgot to mention, actually, each week of this month highlights a specific identity in the APIDA community. So this week is APIDA women. So we're super excited that Shar and Robin were here to be there for us during this time. And then also next week is queer APIDA. So we're highlighting our queer community. And then the week after that is international and first gen APIDA. And then the week after that, our final week, is multiracial and transracial adoptee APIDA. So we want to recognize the diversity within it. And last comment is that my envisionment of APIDA Futures is that APIDA, we have to get out of the mindset that APIDA is straight, because it's not, and that we have a very diverse community, as we've been talking about this whole time. We also have APCC care packages that we have. If you're in Corvallis, Oregon, and on this call, please go sign up. I believe Jonathan, Bekah, or Angela can step into if I misdirect folks. You can sign up for a care package or just pick it up at APCC on May 9th, so this Sunday. Oh wait, actually the deadline to sign up for them is this Sunday, I believe. So go ahead and sign up for those. And if you have more questions, let us know. And then we also have so much going on this month. We're super excited about it. Thank you for bearing with us. We have a docuseries by one of our wonderful staff members at APCC called I Am, But I Am Not, a mini docuseries about the diversity of APIDA identity. And we have wonderful, wonderful events that are going on that the wonderful staff of APCC has put on. And so we have some next week as well. If you want any more information about those going on, please go ahead and follow us on Instagram or Facebook. I believe our Instagram is at OSU APCC. Same as our YouTube, and I believe our Facebook is the same, but all of those are on there if you want to sign up and register for anything. They're all free and amazing events that are going on, put on specifically for you all. And so we're super excited about that. This, I promise this is the last thing. Before we go, is there, how can folks contact you, Sharda or Robin? Through social media, through email? How, if folks really resonated with what you talked about and wanted to like see more of your work or anything like that, how can they contact you?
So probably the best way to contact me is through my email with Oregon State University. So it's Robin, ROBIN.Fifita, my last name, at OregonState.edu. My social media is sleeping. It's been asleep for a while. So we're going to let that part of my life be in slumber for a while. I may have a website at some point, but hit me up if you have any questions about art, poetry, reproductive justice through doula work, or conversation. So would love to hear from folks.
Yeah, I just posted, I'm similar to Robin. I'm not very active on Instagram, but I do check it from time to time. So I posted my Instagram user ID. It's @sharkalyanam. And my email, Oregon State email is also here in the chat, KUMARAKS @oregonstate.edu.
Thank you both so much. I feel super honored and excited to be in this space with each and every one of you here, even my co-host that we have every week. I know that you all have valuable and wonderful things to say. And I'm just super glad that you were all able to be present today and talk about this really important topic. But thank you all so much, everyone in YouTube or on in the webinar. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And we do all of this for you all. And so thank you so much. And we will see you at other APIDA events. Thank you.